An underrated skill is being able to differentiate between what does and does not matter, and then to focus on what's within your control to influence a positive outcome. It brings us back to the idea of disconnecting our expectations from how we want the world to work and aligning them instead with how the world actually works. This is true for most things in life, but it becomes exceptionally true when we're talking about investing. In the previous lesson, we saw how large of an impact time plays on our long-term success as investors. So it makes sense that 1. We want to invest for as long as possible, which means starting sooner than later. And 2. In order to maximize our success, we want to be doing the right things from the very beginning. In other words, we want to put ourselves in the best position to be successful, and we want to stay there forever. Most investors go wrong by overemphasizing the importance of returns, especially in the beginning. They do this in 2 main ways. They disregard their contribution rate, and they chase performance. Let's start by taking a closer look at the first one, disregarding their contribution rate. Compound interest allowed Warren Buffett to get 144 times the return during the 38 years after his 56th birthday, compared to the 38 years before it. Buffett is Buffett because he had $1 billion to compound after his 56th birthday. If he had $1 million or anything less, he still would have been unbelievably successful, but we wouldn't know who he is. In order to really get the most out of compound interest, we need to make contributing to it a priority. We need to build a foundation of money that will be exposed to its power for decades to come. Earning 10% on $1,000 won't do much for us. Earning 10% on $100,000 expedites the wealth building process. We also need to keep in mind that compounding takes time. We're talking decades and decades. We have to have realistic timelines for what we're trying to accomplish. Even while getting great returns, our regular contributions are going to make up the majority of our portfolios for years to come. In this example, it takes almost 20 years for our returns to become the majority of our portfolio. Ignoring our contribution rate is like paying for a vehicle that we can't afford to put gas in. It doesn't matter how good it looks, if we can't get it to go anywhere, it doesn't really do any good for us. Contributions are the fuel of your investments, especially when you're first getting going and building up your base of investments. It's much more productive to focus on your contribution rate than what you choose to invest in, especially since, as we'll soon see, choosing what you invest in almost makes no positive difference in the long term. The second big mistake people make is chasing performance. Chasing performance often requires someone to take on a ton of risk. And although taking on big bets can make you feel like you're moving closer towards your goals, the risk that it exposes us to actually moves us further away from our goals because something outside of our control can wipe it all away. Let's think about it in a completely different, but hopefully relatable way. Let's pretend you go into work and your boss needs you to get as much done as possible before the end of the day for a big project. In order to get as much work done as possible, you might consume extra caffeine throughout the day, skip breaks, eat junk food instead of a healthy lunch that'll take too long to prepare, and you might even work unpaid overtime to finish up. These are things that you could do if needed once in a while, but from a long-term productivity standpoint, we know that extra caffeine, lack of breaks, unhealthy eating habits, and being overworked leads to burnout, a point where you're not in a position to help anyone. When we try to force long-term results to happen over a short period of time, we might get lucky and sometimes it'll work out, but we put ourselves in a position of asking for trouble. Another recurring idea that will be woven into this course is that in order to be successful investors, we don't need to have the best result in any given year. Instead, we want to achieve very good results for as long as possible. Short-term success, followed by prolonged periods of burnout, is not what we're looking for. We want to operate at our very best for as long as possible, which requires us to do so in a sustainable, efficient, and optimized manner. We need to be able to zoom out to see the entirety of the timeline that we're working out with. Again, trying to force long-term results over a short period of time will move us further away from what we're trying to work towards. Wealth takes decades to build, and that's okay, because it's supposed to. Investing can be tricky for a lot of reasons, but I think it mostly comes down to the fact that investing is neither an art nor a science. It lives somewhere in between the two disciplines, in a vast gray area that I don't know if anyone will ever truly master. There are so many variables that influence investment returns, and at the end of the day, we are all human, and we know that unavoidably humans make mistakes. This is reflected in the fact that about 90% of day traders lose money and ultimately give up, even though they're trying to make money, or that the majority of active investment managers actually underperform the exact benchmark that they're trying to outperform. Investing is one of the rare things in life where more time and more energy doesn't translate into better results. There's actually a lot of evidence that suggests that the less someone tries to influence their investment returns, the more success they'll actually have. Before we get into what actually matters, and I thank you for your patience as I know it's been a journey to get to this point, I want to talk about why it's so important to make the best decisions that we can. When we're weighing the pros and cons of making an investment decision, we need to think about the amount of money in not only its current value, but in its potential future value. The rule of 72 is a way to quickly calculate how many years it'll take your money to double given a specific rate of return. Divide 72 by your rate of return, and that gives you the rough number of years. If we expect to earn a 7% return over a long period of time, then it would take our money roughly 10 years to double. That means that every $10,000 today is equal to about $160,000 in 40 years. When you start thinking about money in its potential future value rather than its current value, it can really emphasize the importance of making sure that we're doing the right things from the very beginning. Mistakes made early could subtract years of income from future you. Now let's talk about what matters with our long-term success as investors. It really comes down to three main things: diversified asset allocation, security selection, and market timing. But the weighting of importance between the three things is anything but balanced. Diversified asset allocation accounts for about 90% of our long-term performance, leaving security selection and market timing to fight over the remaining 10%. In this lesson, we're going to focus on diversified asset allocation, and later in the behavior and investing chapter, we'll dive deeper into why security selection and market timing play such a small role in our overall success as investors. Asset allocation refers to the mix of stocks and bonds within our investment portfolio. To make things simpler, I like to think of it as if it was a recipe. Our ingredients are stocks and bonds, and our asset allocation represents how much of each ingredient we're using in a recipe. If you've ever baked in the past, you know that the ingredients are important, but even more important is having the right ratios of those ingredients. You can make great cookies with so-so ingredients but perfect ratios, but you can't make great cookies with fantastic ingredients but awful ratios. Your asset allocation is based on two things: your risk tolerance and your timeline for reaching your goals. It's important to take both into consideration. If you have a high risk tolerance, but a goal is closely approaching, investing solely based on your risk tolerance could expose the funds for that goal to too much risk, which could result in a temporary loss of funds when you need them. The opposite is also a problem. Investing too conservatively for long-term goals will reduce the overall expected return and require a higher contribution rate or longer timeline to fund the goal. We want balance in what best makes sense for what we're working towards. The ultimate job of asset allocation is putting your money in the most effective position to work towards your goals, whether that's growing your funds, preserving your funds, or somewhere in between. Diversification works by spreading out investment risk across many different companies, industries, and countries. Asset allocation by itself is not enough. Investing your entire stock portion into one company doesn't reduce risk or create a long-term approach on any level. We don't want to trick ourselves into thinking we're doing the right thing. We actually have to be doing it. Diversification reduces the overall impact that any singular company has on our portfolio, while increasing the expected survival time of our portfolio. Remember, we don't need the highest return in any given year. We want to get great returns for as long as possible. Diversification doesn't remove any and all risk from our portfolio. As investors, we're always exposed to a level of overall market risk. Market risk is constant, and you can think of it as the price you pay for admission. But we can see that the more companies that we invest in, the less our specific risk becomes. It moves our portfolio from the chance I lose all my money to the chance I experience a short-term decrease in value. With investing, hindsight is always 20/20. Of course, anyone that could have, should have invested in Amazon. Of course, someone should have thrown everything they had into the S&P 500 at the bottom of the 2008 financial crisis. The impossible thing to know is what to do at the time. Diversification allows us to be shareholders in so many different companies that we don't have to think about which companies to buy. We already own them. Diversification and asset allocation are great things individually, but putting them together takes it to the next level. It's like 1 + 1 = 3. If you are well diversified within an asset class, but that allocation towards that asset class is all wrong, then it's likely not a great investment for you. Having a perfect allocation for you is great, but if your stock's allocation is made up of one company, it's really not good. It can put you in a position where you're exposed to too much unnecessary risk. Even in a good year, it can still be a bad thing. To illustrate this point, let's look at an exaggerated example. Let's say that in a given year, bonds return 3%, stocks return 7%, and the single best investment has a return of 20%. Our friend Bob invests in a diversified portfolio consisting of 50% bonds and 50% stocks, an asset allocation appropriate for his goals. His annual return ends up being 5%. Bob's best friend, Barb, takes a different approach. She picked the one that returns 20%, but her asset allocation is way off, only allocating 10% of her funds towards this investment, and the rest towards bonds. Her annual return ends up being 4.7%. Even though Barb got lucky and picked the best performing stock, she underperformed Bob because her asset allocation was way off. I want to end this lesson in the chapter's material by saying that investing can be as complicated or as simple as we want it to be. It might not always feel like it, but we have far more control and influence over our lives than we give ourselves credit for. If you're watching this course and have made it this far, my guess is that chances are you're a first-generation wealth builder. You're trying to be the first investor or millionaire or wealthy person in your family, the one who starts it all, removing money as a worry, an argument, or a cause of stress from your life. By choosing to invest and choosing to invest properly, we can create extraordinary positive influence not only over our own lives, but over the lives of those around us. And if we do it really right, we can positively influence the lives of future generations.